is Steve Laffey's Fixing America. And now, broadcasting live from the Fixing America Command Center in Fort Collins, Colorado, here is your host, Steve Laffey.
Good afternoon, Steve Laffey here. Great to be with you here on a great Thursday afternoon. I don't know when the frigid temperatures will leave Colorado, but I've lived here on the Front Range now for, it'll be 4 years now. I've never seen snow stick around and not be able to melt no matter what. Usually the sun here is so strong that it just melts. It melts the ice and the snow pretty quickly. We've got, I think, an interesting show for you today. And it was difficult for this one to put together because after yesterday's show, we did a show yesterday on the budget, the disastrous budget, the throwaway budget, the Republican, 169 Republicans in Congress and House of Representatives who just gave up on trying to fix this budget and not leave it to the crisis that's coming. And I kept thinking, we got to do a show now about the Fed. And why, we talked about the Fed. We've talked about Janet Yellen before. I know this is a vastly different radio show than you ever listened to in your life, where we're not screaming about, one person or another. We're just trying to explain and get people to understand so you can take this information at LaffeyRadio.com. We put it in short versions, too, so you can just send like the Laffey Minute this morning. It's about this topic. You can send it to your friends at LaffeyRadio.com. But why is it so important to connect the budget disaster we talked about yesterday without going all into it again today to the Federal Reserve that we're going to talk about today? And the real important reason is that our congressmen and senators, they have obviously taken the view that they can shift everything to the Federal Reserve, that they don't have to do their job, and that the magical potion, the only thing that we have to believe in, is the monetary policy of the Fed. And then you have to make this corollary, unless you think everybody is just totally wakes up in the morning and is totally dishonest. Some do. That they actually think that the Fed can do the job. So the Fed must be right. Because in life, it's important whether you're right or wrong. It's not important in Congress, I suppose. And it hasn't been important in public policy. Time after time, and we're going to go through this stuff, where Hank Paulson, the former Secretary Treasurer, who was around from 2006 to 2009, was a total disgrace, who said things that made no sense at all, who figuratively put the gun to the bank's heads on a Saturday night and said, you will take this money, like a fascist country. He's still being interviewed all the time, like, what's your thoughts on this, Hank? I mean, even though he was dead wrong. So that's the important point we got to get across, that something has gone so awry, even though things have happened since 2009. We're going to talk about this because it was a great full-page article with 11 points that I took for the show to show how that since the bottom of the crisis, let's say, in 2009, if you call it the bottom of March 2009, in fact, March 2009 with the S&P bottomed, I hate to say the number, but in the 600 and change range, and now is up more than 100% from the bottom. But that's when they kind of ended the recession. And you might remember back, by the way, people don't realize why the market started to rally then. The market started to rally then because the Fed and the guys who are the GASB people, the guys who take care of the accounting rules in our country, said don't market to market, just market to the future call. And not to get too complicated, but if you have to mark things to market, you have a real problem when they're down. If you mark them to where they're going to mature, yeah, they're just going to mature. So altogether, we've got this real problem. Should we take a very few amount of people, 15 so people who are at the Federal Reserve, and really one decision, it really comes down to one decision maker, the head of the Fed. Always seems that way. They always talk about consensus. Should we take that as they're going to be right about things, and has their performance been good over time? So if it was been good all the time, then we don't have to worry about the invisible hand of Adam Smith. Don't worry about this company here. We'll just do what they do, take our lessons from them. Oh, but that would be like communist China or the old Soviet polity. It doesn't work. So we have this concentrated power where the congressmen have given away, and the senators, I mean the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Congress, and the president basically, given away their power on fiscal policy because they're doing nothing to the Fed. And the Fed won't come back and say, which undoubtedly I think some of them must know, hey, we can't do all the heavy lifting. You've got to do something. No, they say, yeah, we can do it. We can do it. We can add $4 trillion. I mean, M2 money supply figures were like $10 trillion last I looked. They added $4 trillion to the balance sheet. So people now think, and the markets now price in this perfection of the Fed having success. So before we go backwards, it just so happened we picked this show for today, but the front page above the fold of two of the major newspapers that I read in the day, the Wall Street Journal, Investment Business Daily, have top stories about the Fed. One story, and we're going to go talk about the future here. Can they be right? Should they be right? Should we trust them to be right? But here's the article today. Fed eyes bubble risks, minutes of the meetings that they recently had show. And so and I know most of you are listening and not watching, but if I held this up, they put out a graph, the number of the Fed officials who feel more uncertain than usual about their economic growth projections. So if you go back to about a year ago, many of them, most of them saw many downside risks in the 2013 economic growth prospects. And they were wrong. Economic growth went up that year. Now they see almost down to zero. Almost none of them see any chance of a decline. The uncertainty level is very, very low. But last year they were totally wrong. In fact, last June, or May or June it was, the Federal Reserve under Ben Bernanke decided that they would not lower the amount of assets they were buying every month from $85 billion to $75 billion. And by the way, you have to ask yourself, are they into so much perfection that they just pick these numbers and they're the right numbers, or do you think it's just a rounding thing? Do you think they sit around at the Fed and say, we got to lower it, and someone says, well, mathematically, Mr. Bernanke, Chairman Bernanke, I think we should do $10 billion. They never do like 9.3 billion. There's no mathematical formula. They just whip it up there. Why is it not 20 billion that they reduce it by? So looking at the article, it's almost a comical article. If you read it as, do they really know what they're talking about? If you read it today, which most people do, is that they really do know what they're talking about. It's just an article written by some journalist who reads through the minutes and says that the Fed, biggest issue, will be watching for new bubbles. A guy named Dan Greenhouse, very famous economist, global strategist, I should say, says the Fed is looking for evidence that they may be creating asset bubbles. And you stop the article. The Fed is looking for it. The Fed doesn't know. Go back to 2007. Go back to 2006, where Alan Greenspan said over and over again, there's no asset bubbles. Whereas literally the man sitting at a coffee shop, that would be me, my buddy Jimmy, a mortgage broker, who told me there was a giant asset bubble. People wrote articles about it. People looked out of the ways to short it, but Alan Greenspan, living in the woods, didn't see any asset bubbles. You have the Secretary of Treasurer of the United States of America in 2007. I have it right here. I didn't mean to go backwards before I finish this article, but we got to do it. Paulson says in 2007, April of 2007, that U.S. housing sector is at or near the bottom. This is just before the market fell apart. At the bottom, what was he talking about? The housing market is at or near the bottom. The U.S. economy is healthy and robust. So there's a Secretary of the Treasurer. So my point is these people are wrong. And it would be one thing if they were simply wrong a very small amount of time, and when they were wrong, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. That'd be like, should eat grape nuts, oatmeal in the morning. Or maybe all right, whatever. I should eat more grape nuts, or I should have had more vegetables, but I had some vegetables, and I'm a little bit wrong, but I'm not keeling over today. No, when they're wrong, they've cost us so much money. They've cost every American, not every family, every American versus a normal recovery, they've cost us $4,100 per person from 2009 to today. What would you do with the money? These are the people making decisions, and this is what they're doing now. Listen to some of the meanings of what they're looking at to get answers. Several Fed officials commented on the rise in the forward price-to-earnings ratio of some small-cap stocks. What? That's where they're looking for bubbles? We go out all day. I'm going to run out of time just taking this one article, but this is just today's paper. They also have an eye on inflation. They're trying to get inflation up to 2%. Stop. Why are they trying to get it up to 2%? What's wrong with no inflation? And how well do we think that the Fed, and we're going to go into the past statements, that the Federal Reserve can control this? No. What's happened from yesterday's show to today's show, to understand it clearly, that these people who run the Federal Reserve are now totally in charge of the U.S. economy. Our congressmen say it's fine. Not all of them, by the way, to his credit, not Rand Paul, not a bunch of people, and so forth. In fact, yesterday, 2 days ago, they confirmed Yellen. It's important to point out there were 11 Republicans in the Senate who voted for her. None of these people we should have in office. If they know so little. By the way, one of them is Jeff Flake out of Arizona, a normally conservative guy who I had dinner with one time. By the way, couldn't be a nicer guy. You will not meet a nicer guy. Unless he totally fooled me for like 3 hours over a dinner out in Florida one time. It didn't really sound like a guy didn't belong in politics. But he must know so little. Why would he vote? Why would Tom Coburn? Normally, why would he vote to confirm Janet Yellen? The list is Lisa Murkowski. She can do it. Kelly Ayotte, she knows nothing. Lamar Alexander, I have no idea why he's voting for her. Richard Burr, Saxby Chambliss, Dan Coates, Lisa Collins, obviously out of Maine, Bob Corker. I have both Tennessee senators, and Mark Kirk out of Illinois, who I know little about. But 11 Republicans. There was no need, by the way. A bunch of people couldn't make it back from the storm. That's why the vote was not up to 100. But given the track record of the Federal Reserve that we're going to go into, why would we trust them to make decisions of such magnitude? Why would we suggest that they know something about the true answers of where the economy is? Even the beginning of this article shows clearly that they are almost like Investors Business Daily puts out a bull and bear report. And the bull and bear report, it comes out every Thursday afternoon. It's actually pretty interesting to read. And you can see market turns, not at the same day, but within many times, and there's many things to look at, not to get into the stock market totally with you. But one of them would simply be if everybody's bullish, it's probably the market everybody's already in. And today, about 60% of the people who are investors, who run money, are bullish. It's like within a percentage point of a 5-year high. And the 5-year low is something like 14%, and there they are. They represent basically the Federal Reserve. And the same kind of attitude. Instead of looking at it with a jaundiced eye, they're just like, oh, the stock market's up, and the wealth effect must be working. And yet, we've got extremely, and I'll go through some of this stuff here. This is what we've got in the last 5 years. We've had so little success that you can't believe that people write these articles. I'll get into that after the break. We're going to take a quick break here. We got a lot to cover here. It's Steve Laffey. It's Steve Laffey's Fixing America. I want to cover the last 5 years. I want to cover the guy who is the senior guy at the New York Federal Reserve, who was off by 6 standard deviations of what he thought was going to happen in 08, 09. He's still working. He's still working at the Federal Reserve of New York. He was still giving information to Timmy Geithner, who became the Secretary-Treasurer, who used faulty information, faulty thoughts in his decision-making process. So Steve Laffey's Fixing America at LaffeyRadio.com. Like us on Facebook. Like us on Twitter. Follow us on Twitter, I should say. Follow us on Facebook. But it's Laffey Radio. We appreciate what you're doing out there. The show is starting to grow, and the message is getting out. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
Picture this, your next trip, Utah, 5 national parks. First, Zion. You're walking. The ground rises. The ground drops. The ground becomes water. Next, rice. You're riding a mule. You're riding a mule under giant orange drip castles. You are not dreaming. You will not forget this. On to Capitol Reef. Take the scenic route. The really scenic route. Take a path you've never taken and see the stars for the first time. Now for Canyonlands. You're riding a bike. You're riding a bike on Mars. Now you're riding the rapids. Class 2, Class 3, Class 4, Classic. Arches, 5:32 a.m. Some things are worth racing the sunrise for. The horizon lightens. You round the corner. Whoa. This is Life Elevated. The Mighty Five. 5 iconic parks, 1 epic experience. Plan your trip at visitutah.com.
I'm always up for a challenge. It's the feeling of accomplishment that drives me. And there's no better challenge than serving part-time in the Coast Guard Reserve. I protect my country, work with the best and brightest, I get great pay and benefits in return. The Coast Guard Reserve is important work. I get to serve my community, and it's always rewarding.
If you were born ready, there's a new challenge waiting for you. Learn about serving part-time at gocoastguard.com/reserve.
This is Nnamdi Asamoah. I play football for the Philadelphia Eagles, but what I do off the field with United Way might be more important. I'm a volunteer tutor and mentor. Why? Because over 1 million kids a year drop out of school, and that's not okay. It takes 12 years to create a graduate, but it takes about the same time to create a dropout. And the difference between a child becoming one or the other could be me, or it could be you. Studies show that if we get to these kids earlier, their chances are better. And kids who read well by 3rd grade are more likely to graduate. So join me in United Way. Suit up and take the pledge. Become a volunteer reader, tutor, or mentor. Because when a child succeeds, we all succeed. Give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Take the pledge at unitedway.org. Brought to you by United Way, the Ad Council, and the National Football League.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
Let's take you now to Washington, where former U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan has told Congress that he was partially wrong to resist regulation of the trading of some securities, leading to credit default swaps, which eventually led to subprime mortgage crisis. Greenspan made the admission on Thursday at a hearing held by the House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. The former Fed chairman acknowledged his mistakes in believing that by operating purely in its own self-interest, banks could also be counted on to protect their shareholders and the equity of their institutions. At the hearing, Greenspan described the financial crisis as a once-in-a-century credit tsunami and said stabilization of the housing markets is still many months away. He's also calling for regulatory reforms in the areas of fraud, settlement, and securitization to re-establish financial stability.
Well, there's Alan Greenspan. Steve Laffey. Yeah, Steve Laffey's Fixing America. That's Alan Greenspan. A report about how he admitted that he was partially wrong. But if you listen carefully, I mean, what's he really calling for? He's one man. This is the problem. He's one man calling for a whole new set of regulations and once-in-a-century stuff that he talks about, rather than we need an economy that works. We need regulation that works. We can't rely upon the Federal Reserve. And this is my great fear. We now rely on the Federal Reserve about 100% to keep the economy going. We don't rely on American workers. We don't rely on getting cheap energy into our country, although we've got some coming, and about to screw that up too by sending it out of this country and raising the price of natural gas, so our manufacturing companies won't be competitive like they are starting to become competitive. We need the entrepreneurship of people and some certainty that things won't keep changing. And so with Alan Greenspan, he advocated this wealth effect back in 87 after he became chairman. He served all the way till December 31st of 06, I guess. But clearly, by the way, no one is saying that Alan Greenspan is not one of the smartest guys you'd meet. I'm sure he is. He made a gigantic amount of money in his life, relatively speaking, by being, before they had real computers, by getting information quicker to manufacturing concerns about what the price and performance of, say, price of steel he thought it would be, by reading the, quote, the tea leaves, but really was aggregating data. He was a master of it. And by the way, it doesn't make him a great Federal Reserve chairperson. It just made him a great aggregator of information. But when that failed him, he was sitting there aggregating information, and it failed him. Now, one of the articles about Greenspan, to go back, and we'll get off with Greenspan, but he wrote really a seminal article back in March of 2009 called "The Fed Didn't Cause the Housing Bubble." Really? And we can go into, he basically blames China. But it was very clear in 01, 02, 03 that rates should have been raised by everybody, if indeed you're following the normal Federal Reserve of what had been done in the past, by capacity in the country, by inflation, something called the Taylor rule. So he should have. He didn't. He didn't. He fell for his own tricks, and that's what happens. We let one man make the decision, and he became so powerful. He became so powerful that all the hearings, not all the hearings, we'll play some, but many of the hearings were people just kowtowing. This all happened from 1987 all the way through to 2006. And of course now Greenspan has such egg in his face. In fact, we should play some clips in this segment. Here's Greenspan on Frontline, I think around 2009, talking about the fact that basically he was wrong.
Alan Greenspan retired from the Federal Reserve just before the crisis hit in 2006.
Committee will please come to order.
Last year, he once again appeared before the Congress.
You see Greenspan at the hearing table after the collapse, and you see a crushed man, really.
He said that the premise that you could trust markets to regulate themselves was misplaced.
You have been a staunch advocate for letting markets regulate themselves. And my question for you is simple. Were you wrong?
Yes. I found a flaw, but I've been very distressed by that fact.
You found a flaw in the reality?
Flaw in the model that I perceived is the critical functioning structure that defines how the world works, so to speak.
In other words, you found that your view of the world, your ideology, was not right.
Precisely. No, that's precisely the reason I was shocked, because I had been going for 40 years or more with very considerable evidence that it was working exceptionally well.
After almost 2 decades of public service, he realizes that the economic philosophy that he had pushed so hard, resisting regulation of derivatives, he realized that there were some fundamental flaws in that whole philosophy.
It was a pretty incredible moment that after a lifetime of faith in a certain way the world worked, that Greenspan would say, I was wrong.
It struck me as someone admitting that the core belief that had animated, basically a 20-year, 18-year career as Fed chief was wrong. It's stunning, but it doesn't undo the damage.
All right, so this gets back to the crux of this show. What if Janet Yellen's wrong? We're relying on basically one person with 311 million Americans who are looking to the future for their children. Our Congress have abdicated their responsibility for any type of discipline on our country, on our deficits, on our long-term deficits, on our public debt. They've abdicated almost all of them, most of them, enough so that it's a joke. And they've turned it over to Janet Yellen after they turned it over to Bren Bernanke, after they turned it over to Alan Greenspan. Greenspan gets up and after 40 years says, doesn't say, by the way, I was off a little bit. I was off by 3% in my thinking, and I'm kind of moving toward what he says, monetarist, Keynes, doesn't matter, by the way, whatever he says. No, he says he's totally dead but wrong about how the world works. But we put him in charge as the longest, maybe the second longest serving Fed official with more power than any of the other ones probably combined, as far as the respect people had for him. And so why would we do it again? This is the part that's unanswered in American politics. in the newspapers that I read, in the shows I listen to. As I said yesterday, after they canned the budget with 2 changes to it in January, after they passed it in December, late December, by the way, December 17th, middle December, how would we have any trust in them in the future? How would we have trust now that Janet Yellen takes over from Ben Bernanke that they can unwind the $4 trillion? It's not like when Greenspan didn't do this, the balance sheet of the Fed, it was never $1 trillion. I don't have it in front of me. It could have been $300 billion just buying and selling some securities. Now they built it up to $4 trillion. So what if they're wrong? And I think they are. And I think we've done ourselves a great disservice. But listen, that's the crux. We can almost stop now. That's the crux of the show. Now we can show you how wrong people have been, and we will. You know? And Greenspan, by the way, when he's talking about derivatives, and doesn't go into it in detail in that clip, what if he was or wasn't wrong about what he's even saying now? I mean, for example, I went back and grabbed, I was talking yesterday about Stockman's book. I went back and read some pages. But when you go back to 2008, it had always been my contention, and I've got some evidence here to back it up, that there was never going to be a global meltdown over what happened to, say, AIG, the large insurance company. Just from my background, and I'm not an expert in insurance at all, was that, wait a second, if they have a problem with these CDSs, with these collateralized derivatives, and it's X% of their portfolio, who cares? All this other money around the country, in Connecticut, in Rhode Island, in Massachusetts, all the other insurance companies, they were just rolling up insurance stuff, right? That's all regulated by states. That money's in the account. That money's not sitting there in some derivative. That's another part of the firm that's going to go broke. That part's going to bring down Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley, but it's not bringing down Joe Blow on Main Street. No way. And heck, let me read you a little bit from, just to show you. Because even the Fed didn't get it then. This is page 7 of Paulson's Folly by Stockman. The paper trail uncovered by congressional investigators, which I don't have made the news, shows that the $400 billion of busted CDS insurance issued by AIG was held by a very small number of the world's largest financial institutions, and virtually none of it was held by the banks of Main Street, which we told people we were saving Main Street, but they didn't hold this stuff. They couldn't hold the stuff. They didn't understand the stuff. And it goes on, another page. Hank Paulson was running around Washington with his hair on fire, but contrary to the message he repeated over and over to purposely petrify congressmen, his true mission was not to save middle American annuities and retirees, because, by the way, this is me talking now, he didn't have to. They were already being protected by insurance regulations from Connecticut to California. Instead, this alleged threat to millions of policyholders was a beard, a falsehood, behind which stood that handful of giant financial institutions which had purchased what amounted to wagering insurance from AIG Holding Company. Yeah, that's what I always thought. And it never really comes out. And so Greenspan's not just wrong, he's double wrong. He's been wrong about a lot of things. Why are we allowing so much power to be put in the hand of one person? I mean, look at some of the statistics, and we haven't even gone through these at all. We're going to take another break. But look through some of the statistics since 2009. You have to ask yourself, even after the crash or the Great Recession, or whatever you want to call it, the financial panic, 2008 running into 2009, the recovery when the Fed and the President Obama, and I'm not excluding, by the way, President Bush from this. He was a disaster on this. A total disaster on the bailouts and where the money went. It didn't help. It didn't help America. It's hurt America. It's added to our debt. And they were wrong. But they've been wrong about what was going to happen from 2009 to 2014, January of 2014, as we're sitting here. We'll be back with a lot of these things to show you. It's Steve Laffey, Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We're at LaffeyRadio.com. We'll take another break. We'll be right back.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
I am an American soldier.
I'm a warrior and a member of a team.
I serve the people of the United States and live the Army values.
I will always place this first. I will never accept defeat.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never quit.
I will never leave a fallen comrade.
I am disciplined.
I am disciplined. Physically and mentally tough.
Trained and proficient in my warrior tasks and drills.
I always maintain my arms, my equipment, and myself.
I am an expert and I am a professional.
I stand ready to deploy, engage, and destroy the
enemies of the United States of America in close combat.
I am a guardian of freedom and the American way of life.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
I am an American soldier.
There's strong, and there's Army Strong. See what it takes at GoArmy.com.
Well, I finally did it. I opened a 401k.
What? Why? Just wait for the inheritance. We've definitely got a rich uncle somewhere. We're one call away from the winner's circle at the Derby, dinners with multiple forks, a vacation home in the country, using summer as a verb.
You don't actually think that, do you?
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs, the Rhode Island Society of CPAs, and the Ad Council.
When I have an asthma attack, I feel scared. It's like tiny nails in the air poke my lungs. I start to cough. Sometimes my parents have to take me to the hospital.
Today, 1 out of 13 children suffer from some form of asthma, accounting for nearly 1/3 of all emergency room visits.
I feel like I'm choking. It's kind of like an elephant is on my chest. A little whistle sound comes out when I breathe.
But while your child may suffer from asthma, asthma doesn't have to make your child suffer. There are simple ways you can prevent your child's next attack. To learn more, log on to www.noattacks.org or call your doctor, because even one attack is one too many.
I feel like a fish with no water.
Brought to you by the EPA, the Ad Council, and this station.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
My question to you, Mr. Chairman, is this. What will it take for you to say to yourself, could I be wrong? You know, what if I'm mistaken? You know, how long is this going to go on? $9 trillion? What if, say, in 5 years from now, we're in a deep, deep slump with your definition of inflation? What if we have high prices going and the economy is very, very weak and unemployment is high? Would you say to yourself then, boy, maybe I really messed up. Maybe I was on the wrong track. Maybe the free market people were right. Maybe Keynes was wrong. Would you ever consider that, or are you absolutely locked into your beliefs?
I'm always open to changing my mind when the facts change, absolutely.
There's the future of, what's that movie where you go back to the future? We've been talking about Alan Greenspan, and now we've got Ron Paul. That's an 09. Where he's, 09, is when he's talking to Bernanke. And Bernanke at the end says, yeah, I guess I could be wrong. And by the way, this is not a personal attack on Ben Bernanke. Came from relatively humble beginnings. He's the head of the Federal Reserve. He's retiring. He may very well wake up in the morning and think he's doing the right thing. Or more than importantly, I actually think he might wake up in the morning saying he's been forced into a very difficult situation. And instead of having the guts to stand up and say, I ain't doing this for all of you. I would just love to see the day when someone gets in front of one of these congressmen asking questions and just say, listen, all I really do, if I get a chance to put, if I ever put someone on the head of the Federal Reserve Board, I'd hope they get up and just in front of Congress and say, listen, all we really do is keep inflation at zero. That's all I really do, buddy. What are you doing? Why haven't you passed the budget? You passed this lousy budget where the deficit's going to go up $7 trillion over the next, 7 or 8, 9 years from where we are at $17 trillion. That's what you did? And you're already making changes to it? Listen, all we do at the Fed is keep the money supply at a rate where with GDP is growing at 3%, we increase it 3%. We know that's difficult to figure out because the definition of money has gotten more unchanged. We have to watch the velocity of money. And so forth. That's all we do. We don't have anything on our balance sheets. What are you doing, Mr. Congressman? But the question on this clip that Ron Paul asked, which is what I'm asking today, What if they're wrong? You know? Here's another. In fact, we don't play these clips. We'll never get to them. Here's another one. Here's Bernanke flip-flopping on being right or wrong.
People think the $600 billion is a terrible idea.
I know that some people think that. What I think they're doing is they're looking at some of the risks and uncertainties associated with doing this policy action. What I think they're not doing is looking at the risk of not acting.
Many people believe that could be highly inflationary, that it's a dangerous thing to try.
Well, this fear of inflation, I think, is way overstated. We've looked at it very, very carefully. We've analyzed it every which way. One myth that's out there is that what we're doing is printing money. We're not printing money. The amount of currency in circulation is not changing. The money supply is not changing in any significant way.
So to lend to a bank, we simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account that they have with the Fed. So it's much more akin, although not exactly the same, but it's much more akin to printing money than it is to borrowing.
You've been printing money.
Well, effectively. And
can you act quickly enough to prevent inflation from getting out of control?
We could raise interest rates in 15 minutes if we have to. So there really is no problem with raising rates, tightening monetary policy, slowing the economy, reducing inflation at the appropriate time. Now, that time is not now.
You have what degree of confidence in your ability to control this?
100%.
100%, like Alan Greenspan. 100% confidence. He goes back and forth. This is Frontline from 2011. And it's almost like when you hear that, it's almost like I think to myself, did someone make that up? Maybe the clip I got, maybe that's not him speaking. Is that a mishmash of like a joke? How can anybody be? I'm not 100% certain about anything but one. He's 100% certain that inflation won't rise in time, so that he could actually raise rates in 15 minutes. Can you imagine what would happen if they started raising rates today and said that we've got to get back to normalized interest rates? We've got $4 trillion on our balance sheet here, and we're going to lose an awful lot of money on that, right? But if you market to market, but we're going to do that now because inflation has taken off, and we're going to stop it. Does anybody think they have the guts to do that? And can they do it? What would really happen? Well, here's a scenario for you folks. That happens quicker than they can get out of the $4 trillion, which would be a long time before they can get out of it. They're adding to it by $75 billion at least per month for the rest of this year. So expect the $4 trillion on their balance sheet to go from $4 trillion to minimum 4.5 trillion before it starts going down, where things start to. And by the way, they buy long-term securities, so it's not going down tomorrow morning. So if it gets up ahead of them, and they raise rates, and now the nation is borrowing at mortgage rates of say 6. Let's talk normal. People now, the federal government, which is still running these massive deficits under the lousy budget put forth by Paul Ryan and Murray and voted on by most people in the Congress, including most Republicans in the House, there's no way to pay the interest. It's over. Like throw in the towel. What would happen if we went from $230 to $240 billion a year of interest payments to $1 trillion? Or even half a trillion. There's something called the crowding out effect. How does that not crowd out all their other expenses? Then is that when we go to the people who have Social Security and say, listen, we're cutting the checks 25%? Is that what happens? It's not going to happen. There's only one thing left to happen. The Fed won't do it. They'll stop printing money and will deface the currency, and we'll all lose, unless you're out of the currency, out of the U.S. currency. So there's no good answer for this, and I dare anybody to find the great article about how we get out of this. It's amazing what these people come up with. Here's Newt Gingrich, by the way, talking about it, taking it into a political role. This is just a little bit afterwards.
Ben Bernanke says don't expect the job market to come back for 4, 5, 6 years down the road. That means he's basically predicting that we've had a lost decade. Add to that the accumulated debt, and, the lost decade, Japan never got out of their lost decade. They're still in a lost decade.
But if you have terrible policies, if you have a big bureaucracy, big litigation, big regulation, pro-government employee union, high deficit spending policy, you're going to be exactly where Ben Bernanke is predicting. On the other hand, if the president simply went back to something you and I helped start a few years ago, drill here, drill now, pay less. If you allowed the people of Louisiana, where the governor, Jindal, wants to drill, where the people want to drill, they want the jobs. I was in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina the other day. They want the jobs. The people of Virginia want the jobs. The fact is, you could have a very robust energy industry in the United States. You could keep about $400 billion a year here at home. You'd have a lower price of gasoline, a lower price of energy in general. We'd be better off for it in national security. Our economy would be better off. But that requires a totally different attitude than the kind of big government, anti-business, anti-American energy attitude. You know, this administration is waging a war on American energy, and it's hurting all of us.
Let's talk about...
Here you are. That takes it into the political realm, talking about what we really need for the future. And we don't have to have a lost decade, but look at the Fed's performance, and this is what we got to do this. I'll try to do it quickly. This was in Investors Business Daily today, 11 points to point out from 2009 to today, talking about how the Fed's actions have had very little effect to go along with our bad fiscal policies, but they predicted they would have great effect. Median household income, how do you think that's done the last 5 years? 2009 at end of 2013. Down. Median household income's down. Stock market up 100%. Corporate profits up 60%. Median household income down. How about the wide economic growth gap? GDP growth. Now let's talk about a normal recovery, average recovery of the past 3 recoveries or the past post-war recoveries. You're talking about looking out 17 quarters, roughly where we are today, 4 or 5 years, 17 quarters, we are up 10% in GDP. The normal one would be 17%. That's $1.3 trillion. And that's where we get the number where we are all $4,100 less well off than we would have been if they had a normal recovery. And going back to what I talked about with Stockman, we could have had a normal recovery. That's the thing that they talk about. What would have happened? This is the contagion argument that was always made in 2008. What would have happened? Oh, my gosh. We've got to increase FDIC insurance for people on Main Street because they're afraid of the banks. Nobody was afraid of the banks. These people live in a bubble by themselves, trying to help out their wealthy friends on Wall Street in the big banks. That's exactly what happened. There was no contagion to these people. We've already shown it with insurance companies. Goldman Sachs stock went to zero. Who cares? Somehow overnight they became a bank. Can you go get a loan there? Do you have an ATM card from right now from Goldman Sachs? Do you? Nobody does. I mean, the country does. They're not a bank. They're still an investment bank. They're masquerading as a bank so they could get money so they wouldn't go broke. How about the jobs? We're supposed to have so many more jobs. We have less jobs. Total number of payroll jobs, 136.7 million, 1.3 million less jobs below the level of the economy in December of 2007. Our population grew by 13 million people. They don't have any jobs. How about when you have an economic recovery, aren't less people supposed to be on food stamps? Economy gets better, people get off food stamps, less people on food stamps. 5 years ago, there were 28 million people on food stamps. Today, there's 47 million people on food stamps. How is that helping them? I mean, short term, we understand. I've read articles about whole small cities where people show up at midnight to get food stamps during this economic recovery. 5 years into it. This hasn't worked. Bernanke was wrong. Paulson was wrong. Geithner was wrong. Bush was wrong. Greenspan was wrong. But Yellen, the whole thing is set up for that she has to be right. That she has to get ahead of the curve. If inflation comes, she'll be willing to raise interest rates. It's become apoplectic about it. The more as I do the show, we're leaving all this power in so few hands. Let's give it back to the people. Let them create the jobs. Let the American people create the jobs. Let's get cheap energy. Yeah, we need regulation. How about when you buy a home, put 20% down? And if there's any federal involvement from Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae or whatever these things, they just insure the loan. You pay a little higher insurance if you have a bad FICO score. Okay, we're done. How often did this happen when we had people putting 20% down on that? That's one page of regulation. Steve Laffey, we're going to get one more segment. Be right back. LaffeyRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in.
Stay tuned. Steve Laffey's Fixing America returns after these commercial messages.
I'm in almost every school bus and classroom. I go to school with your children. We say the Pledge of Allegiance together. You see me around the neighborhood and you tell me that I'm a pretty good kid. Well, I'm one out of every 5 children in America, and I'm struggling with hunger. This problem is closer than you think. My teacher tells me we can grow up to be whatever we want. I want to grow up to be someone who doesn't go to bed hungry. There's enough food in this country to feed everybody. Please visit feedingamerica.org today and find your local food bank for ways to help. Every dollar you donate helps provide 8 meals for kids like me, quietly struggling with hunger. Together, we are Feeding America, brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Students, when I call the reason for your absences throughout the years, please exit the auditorium without your high school diploma. Too tired, family trip, sick day, starting the holidays early.
Starting in the 6th grade, students who miss 18 days or more of school in a year for any reason will fall behind and risk not graduating high school. How many days of school has your child missed this year? Absences add up. Keep track at boostattendance.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Army and the Ad Council.
The call to serve. It has no sound, yet I have heard it in the whispered retelling of honorable sacrifices made by those who have served before me. The call to serve has no form, yet I have clearly seen it. In the eyes of men and women infinitely more courageous and more driven than most. The call to serve has no weight, yet I have held it in my hands. I will commit to carry it close to my heart until my country is safe and the anguish of those less fortunate has been soothed. The call to serve is at once invisible and always present. And for those who choose to answer the call, for their country, for their fellow man, for themselves, it is the most powerful force on earth. America's Navy, a global force for good.
And now, back to the Fixing America radio program with your host, Steve Laffey.
The Congress just voted to raise the debt ceiling to more than $14 trillion. Moody's, the bond rater, just said, quote, unless further measures are taken to reduce the budget deficit further or the economy rebounds more vigorously than expected, the federal financial picture for the next decade will at some point put pressure on the AAA government bond rating. Is the United States going to lose its AAA government bond rating? And what happens when the credit markets are no longer willing to buy U.S. debt?
Absolutely not, and that will never happen to this country. And again, if you step back and look at what...
So Standard & Poor's is wrong. The United States will keep its AAA credit rating.
You know, people... Absolutely. And people...
Absolutely. That was 2010. It was February 7th, 2010. That's Timmy Geithner, then the Treasury Secretary of the United States of America, replaced Hank Paulson. Hank Paulson, who was wrong about the economy, we told you in 2007, thought everything was going great. Geithner came on and was asked if we would ever lose our AAA bond rating. Never, basically. 100%. Never going to happen. Friday, August 5th, 2011. The United States lost its top-tier AAA credit rating from Standard & Poor's on Friday in an unprecedented blow to the world's largest economy in the wake of a political battle that took the country to the brink of default. Goes on and on and on. Geithner was wrong. They've been wrong a lot. The more wrong they are, the more powerful they're getting. Geithner didn't leave in disgrace after being wrong and presiding over... Imagine if I had been the Treasury Secretary when The bond rating went from AAA down. I wouldn't have jumped out a window, but I would have felt like it. He runs a leveraged buyout firm, making all kinds of money. Always protected by his buddies. Couldn't have been more wrong about everything he talked about. Couldn't have been more wrong. Let's play. I'm going to play one more of these clips. Here's Paulson, by the way. This is clip 5. Listen to Hank Paulson talking about Bernanke. This isn't 3 years ago. It's important to go back and take a look at how wrong they've been. This is September of 2013.
Hank on Hank. This is my favorite quote in the movie and in all of it. I love this. It's like a poem. Hank is candid. Hank is indiscreet. Hank is decisive. Hank acts too quickly. You're qualified to be the next Fed chairman. I mean, that's great. Now, you're not going to talk to me about Professor Summers or Vice Chairman Yellen. I understand that. But what are the characteristics we need in a Fed chairman is they unwind their balance sheet and we confront those possible instabilities?
Well, the next phase will be an important phase because there's going to be much more of an emphasis on return on assets, productivity, real growth, and we are going to have to, as Chairman Ben Bernanke has said, we're going to have to move from these extraordinarily low interest rates and get back to real markets.
Do you have a confidence, Mr. Secretary, that we will do that without instabilities and shocks?
Well, first of all, there's bound to be volatility. There's no perfect solution. When you have a big, ugly, messy problem, there's never going to be a perfect, elegant solution. And so I believe that Ben Bernanke has been a hero. I think to be where we are today, where you've had growth of 2% since late 2009, right, while we've been undergoing this necessary and massive deleveraging of consumers, right, that's important. So there's bound to be some volatility. But the next Fed chairman, again, which is a huge decision, a very important decision for President Obama, the key qualities are, first of all, fierce, independence, great abilities, and to be someone who...
You want to see a return to that independence of McChesney Martin and the others of 51.
And Ben Bernanke. I mean, Ben Bernanke is... And then someone who's a good communicator and can build consensus.
I want to...
Calls him a hero. It's Hank Paulson. And what I don't understand about these people on TV, they keep bringing these people back. And it always starts with Hank Paulson, that he was never around before there was a problem. He was only there in 2009 at the eye of the problem, I guess. And he's a problem solver. Rather than he was around long before, as we've shown, never saw the problem. And I will tell you this. I saw him speak in January of 2007, Club for Growth Conference. I was sitting next to U.S. Senator now, Pat Toomey. And I wish we had it taped. I actually turned to now Senator Toomey and said, this is scary. Like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's either just a bald-faced liar. And Senator Toomey, whether he did, he looked at me and said he was almost like, not, I would say he was frightened. He was concerned. It made no sense. People knew there was a problem. He didn't. Or, again, he wasn't truthful with people. But why is it so important? Go back before we get to the end of the show. I want to go back to a guy you've never heard of. His name is Simon Potter. These are the people at the Federal Reserve. This is the Director of Economic Research at the Federal Reserve, another very powerful position. Geithner was the head of the New York Federal Reserve. This guy probably reported to him. The stuff that he writes gets up to the Federal Reserve, and they rely on his information. And so he writes an article in November 2011 of why were they wrong, and how wrong can you possibly be? In other words, one would expect that he writes that an October 2007 forecast of real GDP growth would be within 1.3 percentage points of the actual outcome 70% of the time. Not to get too mathematical, but there are standard deviations of how far you're going to be wrong. No one's going to predict anything with accuracy. The New York Fed forecast there was going to be a 2.6% growth in 2008. They were off by 5.9 percentage points. They were off by 6 standard deviations. One standard deviation is 60 some odd percent of the time you're going to be within that if you make a prediction. 2 standard deviation, I think, is 95. I'm doing this from memory, so if I'm wrong. 3 is 99 percentile. So if you make an estimate that the point score in a football game, they're going to a total score of 50 points, and that's been the average, then 1 standard deviation would take in 68% of the time of what those scores are, around 50. He's off by 6 standard deviations. He says why and so forth. And half honestly says why. They misunderstood the housing boom, a lack of analysis, and the rapid growth of new forms of mortgage finance. That's what Greenspan missed. He missed much more than that. Insufficient weight given to the powerful adverse feedback loops between the financial system and the real economy, whatever that means. 6 standard deviations, but we put too much power. When people take this kind of risk with our money, I'll give you an example. Trading desk. I ran a trading desk in the financial sector, Morgan Keegan. And I was very, very careful with the firm's money. We made a good amount of money. I had taken over after they lost a lot of money. We had some great traders, and they did a great job overall. One day, a guy named Robert Montague came in. 2 of our big stocks, they were trading at $115 a share roughly each. I may be off by a little bit. Someone put a news report on that was like a scam, a fraud within within one of the companies, Emulex. But QLogic, its sister kind of company in the industry, they both went down to like $60 in a matter of minutes. Everybody was selling. And I grabbed Montague, who's a genius, real genius, wonderful man, 6'8" guy, great guy, out of industry. And I said, can this be true? He said, no, it can't be true. It can't be true. There's something wrong. Steve, this is not true. I made a decision before they stopped trading stocks to buy some of the stock for our own inventory, totally legal. I didn't bet the whole firm's capital on the fact that Robert Montague is as good a guy as he was, as great a man as I knew him to be, and as good an analyst as he really was. I didn't bet the whole shooting match. I bet some money, enough that if we were right, and we were, but enough if we were wrong, we didn't lose the whole. I didn't get fired. We didn't even have a bad year. So we bought it. They stopped trading it. Sure enough, on the tape, boom, stock opened. By the way, it opened higher than what it was trading at because everybody had to cover their shorts. And the people who had sold it were all mad. And we made an awful lot of money that day, given the capital that we had at the firm. So this is really this is the opposite of what they're doing. We have now bet the whole shooting match on people who have generally been wrong. You wouldn't do that in your company. I've been around meetings where, and if I was good at anything in the business world, I kind of knew what other people's capabilities were, how right they were. And that's how I pick stocks. I really didn't pick them from me looking at the PE ratios. I picked them from analysts who I knew they knew what they were doing, and they could always give me telltale signs of what they really felt and what they were really doing research on. But I didn't bet the whole shooting match on it. We are now betting the whole shooting match on a Federal Reserve System that has generally been wrong and unable, not because they're not smart people. It's too difficult to predict the economy in the next exogenous variable that's going to whack you. You get too comfortable when things are going in a line for too long of a period of time, and you think they're going to keep going in that direction forever. It's too difficult. That's why there are markets. That's why we need regulation, and simple regulation that's steady, that people know how to perform within the markets. Gave you one, we've given it before again. I'll say it again before we close up. You don't need massive regulation. You need banks to be smaller. You can't let them be too powerful the way they are. And Hank Paulson, again, talking about over and over again how it's such a gigantic problem. He gets allowed to talk about this contagion thing that if he hadn't been around, the whole world would have ended. And look how well we've done, given how bad it could have been. I didn't get a chance to go through every one of these statistics, and I will on another show. But it's been terrible. We have workers leaving the labor force. We're down from 66% to 63% over the last 5 years. That's 10 million people who've left the workforce. We don't even know where they are. Maybe they're living at your house. Anyway, the Fed's been wrong. Can't be trusted to make the right decisions. We've got to change the system before it's too late. I don't know how to do it right now, but that's what has to be done. Steve Laffey, Steve Laffey's Fixing America. We thank you for listening in. We're on Facebook at Laffey Radio. Check us out at Twitter. Get our tweets. We do this every day at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. We appreciate your time. God bless you, America. We'll be back with another hard-hitting show tomorrow.
You've been listening to Steve Laffey's Fixing America radio program on the Laffey Radio Network. Fixing America is broadcast Monday through Friday afternoons at 3 p.m. right here at www.laffeyradio.com. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or account of this broadcast without the express written consent of Laffey Network, LLC is prohibited.